Okay, I'm ready to paint my illuminated tile letter. So here we go. I have my color plan right here, ready to go. I have my tile, I have my watercolor, I have water, and different paintbrushes and some paper towel. So with watercolor, we always want to work lightest to darkest. So I am going to kick it off by actually putting in the white for my background back here, which also works out well because it is the background. So it's like this, the furthest away. So it makes sense to work from background to foreground as well. So I'm going to get this white paint really wet here on the palette. You see up here, to get it started, I want to add a good amount of water. And I'm just going to lay it down, keeping in mind that our clay darkens when it gets wet. So we might be a little bit fooled to start off in thinking that we're not getting much coverage or that it's not turning out the way we want to. So I'm going to trust that some of this white will show. Now, white is definitely not the easiest to work with in terms of watercolor. So I'm just going to lay down a layer and let it dry and see how it goes. So I'm going to begin with that. I will definitely switch to a smaller brush for the inside area, but for now I will use this thicker brush. I do want to be careful, although it's nice with the white, I don't have to worry too much about the edges because anything else I lay on top is going to cover it. So as I get darker and darker and more detailed, I need to be extra careful with how I'm painting on. I need to be mindful of how big my brush is. Do I need to switch to a smaller brush? All that good stuff. So once I get that laid in, I will start to work on some of my details. So what I would do next is I would switch over to a smaller brush and start to work in some of this really fun, vibrant yellow. So again, getting this nice and damp and making sure that it's not too thin. I want to be really careful that the consistency of my paint stays where I put it. So I don't want it to be super runny because it might go in places I don't want it to go. So I'll be really mindful of my edges, trying to keep my brush like really flat so that way I'm not accidentally painting the side walls of my filigree or of my letter. Again, remembering that colors like white and yellow, they just they don't look so hot to start, but once we give them time to dry, we're usually pleasantly surprised. So don't panic if it doesn't look like it's covering super well from the start. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue carefully painting this border. I am also going to make sure that I paint this edge as well because I really want it to be carefully finished. So it's good to pick up your piece, to move it around, to hold it, to switch your angles, to switch your perspective, so that way you're making it as easy and accurate for yourself as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish painting up this whole yellow border. After working on my border, I can see that my white already started to dry and it's looking pretty good. So I'm confident that the yellow is going to look good too. And I actually went back and added the yellow center for my flowers and I did my white petals as well. So now I'm going to go back and work in the yellow for my dragonfly's body before I start layering in the orange. So I'm going to paint the top first. Careful not to let it drip. Get those antennae. And then I'm going to very carefully paint the edges because it is raised. So it's important that all of the raised elements get painted, or else we'll have all of these unfinished sides that right now might not look so obvious, but once everything is painting, will really stand out and feel like an unfinished feature. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that everything looks like it got the time and attention it deserves. So once that's down, I'm ready to start working in some orange. Get the side of the head. And again, I can always go back with more paint after it's dried. So I'll rinse out my brush and I'll move on to the orange to get my wings and my diamonds painted. So I'm continuing to work from light to dark. So I went from white to yellow, now to orange. And then I'm going to do green and then the purple. So I'll continue to paint my wings and I'll carefully paint my diamonds. At the very end, I'll paint the inside of those purple. Now that I have my first few colors down, I'm going to go ahead and continue to work from light to dark. So next up, I'm going to add in this beautiful lime green color I have planned for my filigree, also in my border. So I'm just going to begin to layer that on. You can see that my yellow and orange have dried pretty nicely, so we never know until it's completely dry what it's going to look like. So I'll also be mindful and careful to pick up my tile and get those edges. Make sure I'm doing a really good job to be as precise as I can. At the end, you might need to touch up some of those areas as well, but this is definitely a situation where there's some tough angles, so you'll need to really get close, and I would work with my smallest brush to get into some of these small spaces. So once I have this one done, I will go ahead and continue with my other leaves on the opposite side. All right, next up is this really awesome purple that I'm going to use for my letter D. I think this is probably the color I have been most excited about, and I want to be very, very careful to make sure that I am painting it. It's almost exactly the same color, which is so exciting, that I am painting it carefully. It is my darkest color, so I want to be really cautious with it. I want it to go on nice and even because it's front and center. So I want to be extra cautious with this color, making sure I'm very careful when I do paint those edges. So I will most definitely pick it up to get all of those little areas. The purple is covering really nicely, so I don't think I'll need a second coat, but we will see. So I'm going to continue my purple until the entire thing is finished, and then I'll do just my final touch-ups and final details. now that everything has a coat of paint, we are going to just spend a little bit of time going back, touching things up. You can go over and overlap any areas that are a little bit light, get into some small spaces that you might have missed. So it's final touches, final details. I would add some contrast to areas that I planned. So for example, I wanted to bring some of the orange in on the body of the dragonfly. So I would kind of bring some of the detailing in that I had planned for, kind of bringing that together, unifying some of the colors. I might even add a darker green to add some contrast to these kind of leaves and filigree here. So with a kind of dry brush, I might add some texture. I really like the way the dry brushing technique kind of brings out a little bit of the carved areas a little bit more. It just makes it more interesting as opposed to using just a single flat color. Just like a painting, you know, layering is going to give it more interest. You're going to get some cool effects. So I'm going to kind of work around and add some of these elements. I might even add some yellow into my daisies to just kind of add some interest in them as well. So final touches, check all the edges, all the little nooks and crannies, make sure everything has a nice coat of paint, everything has been touched, and that no clay is exposed once you're finished. After that, once it's dry, you'll take a great photograph and submit.